The grand luxury apartment complex had everything: sparkling chandeliers, marble floors, and tenants who thought they were better than everyone else. And then there was James, the janitor. Hardworking, humble, and always ready with a warm smile, he took pride in keeping the place spotless. But to the wealthy residents, he was invisible, until one day he wasn't. When a few tenants accused James of being in places he didn't belong, they forced the building manager to fire him on the spot. Humiliated and heartbroken, James walked out, knowing he had done nothing wrong. But just as he was leaving, something happened, something that changed everything. A sudden, terrifying moment put the lives of those same people in danger, and the man they had just thrown away, he was the only one who could save them. Would James step up to help the ones who had turned their backs on him? James had barely stepped outside when the sound of desperate screams filled the air. His heart pounded as he turned back toward the building. Smoke billowed from the upper floors. Fire. Panic spread like wildfire among the wealthy tenants who had once ignored him. Some ran down the stairs, clutching their expensive belongings, while others were trapped, calling for help from their balconies. James didn't think twice. He threw his bag down and rushed back inside. He knew the layout of the building better than anyone: the hidden maintenance routes, the quickest exits, the places where people might be stuck. But as he climbed the smoky stairwell, coughing and pushing forward, the same tenants who had looked down on him just hours ago stared at him in shock. Would they finally see him for who he truly was? Or would their prejudice blind them even in the face of danger? Thick smoke filled the hallways, making it hard to see, but James kept moving. He could hear cries for help behind closed doors. Without hesitation, he banged on one, then another. "Is anyone in there?" he called, his voice hoarse from the smoke. A frightened voice answered from inside. James forced the door open to find Mrs. Lancaster, an elderly woman who had once complained about him using the front entrance. Now she clung to his arm, terrified. "Hold on to me," he said, guiding her through the darkened hallway. But as they reached the stairs, a loud crack echoed above them. Part of the ceiling was about to collapse. James barely had time to react before he pulled her back, shielding her from the falling debris. Meanwhile, outside, the wealthy tenants who had safely escaped watched in shock. James, the man they had dismissed, was inside risking his life for people who had never given him a second thought. Would he make it out alive? Flames rolled down the hallway, cutting off the main exit. James had no choice but to turn back, searching for another way out. Mrs. Lancaster clutched his arm, coughing uncontrollably. He knew time was running out, not just for her, but for everyone still trapped inside. Further down, he heard more voices. Pushing forward through the smoke, he found a young mother, Olivia, and her son huddled in a corner. The boy's terrified eyes met James's, silently pleading for help. Olivia recognized him instantly, the same janitor she had once ignored in the lobby. Now he was their only hope. James quickly scanned the area. The fire escape was blocked, but he knew of a service entrance through the maintenance wing. "Stay close to me," he ordered, leading them through the thick smoke. Outside, the crowd held their breath. Sirens blared. The building groaned under the weight of the flames, but James was still inside. Would he find a way out before it was too late? As James guided Olivia and her son through the smoke-filled hallway, a deep rumble shook the building. The fire was spreading faster than he had expected. Just as they reached the maintenance wing, a loud crash behind them sent a wave of heat through the corridor. The ceiling had caved in, cutting off their path back. There was no turning around now. James gritted his teeth and pressed forward, but then he heard it, a faint cry coming from a nearby apartment. Someone else was still inside. He hesitated for just a second before making his choice. "Stay here," he told Olivia. "I'll be right back." Pushing through the thick smoke, he reached the door and forced it open. Inside, a teenage girl was trapped beneath fallen debris, struggling to move. It was Mr. Hamilton's daughter, the same man who had led the complaints against James. Outside, Mr. Hamilton stood frozen, watching the flames consume the building. He had spent years looking down on James. But now, the very man he had dismissed was inside, risking everything to save his daughter. Would he get to her in time? James dropped to his knees and started lifting the debris off Mr. Hamilton's daughter. She gasped for air, her face streaked with soot and tears. "I've got you," he said, his voice steady despite the chaos around them. He could feel the heat intensifying. The fire was closing in fast. There was no time to think, only time to act. Hoisting the girl onto his back, James fought his way through the smoke. Olivia and her son were still waiting near the maintenance exit, eyes wide with fear. But when James reached for the door handle, it wouldn't budge. The fire had weakened the structure, warping the frame. They were trapped. For a moment, panic set in. Then James remembered. There was an old service window in the storage room just ahead. It was small, but it might be their only way out. He kicked open the door, rushed inside, and with all his strength, forced the rusted window open. One by one, he helped them climb through, coughing as smoke filled his lungs. Outside, the crowd watched in stunned silence. Mr. Hamilton, who had spent years treating James like he was nothing, now stood trembling as his daughter emerged from the flames, alive, because of the very man he had once tried to push away. Just as James started to climb out, a deafening crack echoed through the air. The building shuddered. A beam, heavy and burning, collapsed right where he stood. The crowd gasped. For a long, heart-stopping moment, there was only smoke and silence. Then, movement. James stumbled out, coughing, bruised but alive. The moment his feet hit the pavement, a wave of cheers and relieved sobs rippled through the crowd. Mr. Hamilton stepped forward, eyes filled with something James had never seen before: respect. But James didn't wait for gratitude. He simply looked at the people who had once cast him aside, nodded, and walked away. He didn't need their approval. He had always known his worth. Now, they did too. In the days that followed, the wealthy tenants couldn't stop talking about what had happened. James, the man they had dismissed without a second thought, had risked his life to save them. The same people who once ignored him now whispered his name with admiration and guilt. Mr. Hamilton, shaken by the experience, tried to find James to thank him. But James had already moved on. He didn't need their apologies. He had always done his job with pride, not for recognition, but because he believed in doing what was right. The building was repaired, and life slowly returned to normal. But something had changed. The tenants who once walked past James without a glance now greeted the new janitor with kindness. They had learned a lesson they would never forget. And as for James, he didn't look back. He knew his worth, and now so did they.